Tonight I want to talk to you about a problem that is inherent on 1978 Makos, but can also be an issue on some other bikes as well. What I'm referring to is how the rear fender mounts to the seat base. And with the foam and the cover on there, when the bolts come through that base from the factory, they can sometimes get loose over time and they're impossible to get tight again unless you take off the cover and take off the foam. What I'm going to be showing you tonight is I'm going to be showing you how to do this using a Honda fender and an older seat base that I have right here. We're going to be drilling a couple of holes through the bottom of that seat base. I'll be showing you how to mount that rear fender to the seat base while you have your cover and your foam off in a way that you won't have any problems with it in the future. Now, keep in mind, I'm only going to do this showing you with 2 bolts. On your Makos and maybe some of your other bikes, you might have 5 bolts that go across the bottom of that fender and that seat base. Let's get started and I'll show you what I'm talking about. With your seat cover and foam now removed, the first thing you're going to want to do is take your fender like this, if it already has the holes drilled in it, and place it on the seat base like I have it here. Then you'll be able to mark it with a Sharpie and you'll be able to drill the holes exactly where they are in your fender. If there are no holes in your fender and no holes in your seat base, you're going to need to drill those things accordingly. Make sure you drill your holes here and here, or wherever they're going to be across that seat base, just a little bigger than 6 millimeters to accommodate that screw. Of course, the holes that will be in your fender like this, you're going to have to make them a little bit bigger to accommodate the rubber grommet. For this application, I'm going to be using a 10 millimeter nut just like this. As you can see, it has that plastic nylock in it. When you do this, you want to make sure that nut fits right inside of this grommet, much like this right here, because you're going to be covering that nut with that grommet, and you'll know more about that in just a second. The next step is to take your 6 millimeter bolt or screw, whichever you're going to use, and you're going to put the fender washer over it, put it through the seat base, and you're going to do the same thing on the other side. This is going to give your base a little more security, or the bolt and the fender mounting to it a little more security on that plastic seat base. You're then going to take your 10 millimeter by 6 millimeter nut, the nylock nut. You're going to tighten it up on there. You're going to get them all through the bottom of that seat base. Get them all nice and tight. The nylock nuts are, of course, because you want to get these things tight, because you're not going to have access to the other side of the screw once you put your seat foam and your cover back on the bike. At this point, you should be putting on your seat foam and your cover, cutting it around everything here nice and neatly, stapling it down so you still have access to these 2 bolts, because you're going to need to get to them to put the grommets and the fender over it. I mentioned a little bit earlier about being sure that you have a grommet with a hole in it, the size that will accommodate going over that 10 millimeter or 8 millimeter nut. I would really recommend you do use an 8 millimeter by 6 nut. This way you have a little more room within the grommet for it to go over that nut. But this is why you need to have it so it's like that. That lock nut is underneath there right now, and as you can see, the grommet has covered it nicely. I'm going to pop these grommets off, we're going to put them in the fender, and we'll get on to the next step. We've got the 6 millimeter bolts through the seat base, we've got the lock nuts on them, we've got fender washers on both sides. Now you can see where the grommet is fit over the 10 millimeter lock nut that's underneath, and over it we have the grommet, we have a couple of washers, and we have some flange nuts holding it all together. For this demonstration, I've only done it with 2 bolts. It's an old seat base, it's the incorrect fender. But you get the idea of how to get your fender attached to the seat of your Mako or any other bike that may have the fender attached to the seat. This is a really secure way to do it. You're not going to have to worry about the bolts coming loose because they're held on by the lock nuts, and you have your regular flange nuts over the top that you can remove at any time should you have to change the fender.